Okay, something really weird is going on with Ordo Chronos, and nobody seems to be talking about it. Not in real life, and not even in the lore of 40K itself, which is super baffling to say the least, as the most widely known fact about them is that they famously disappeared without a trace centuries ago. We hadn't heard anything new about the Ordo until just recently, when they suddenly showed back up again in the timeline at the end of the 41st millennium, acting like nothing had happened. This event was made even stranger by the fact that not a single person thought to ask any questions. Not the High Lords, not the rest of the Inquisition, not even Gilliman. It was as if everyone had simply forgotten that they disappeared. But what if I was to tell you that this seemingly strange lack of questioning by the Imperium, which is completely out of character by the way, is no accident? That despite the overwhelming amount of evidence of their disappearance made available to us as the audience in 40K's lore, from the Imperium's perspective, the disappearance never happened. What if I was to tell you that there was evidence to suggest that their original disappearance was not some great tragedy as many of us have been led to believe? That in their research, they stumbled upon something big, something that would give them the power to transcend time itself, something that may or may not involve another super creepy and mysterious faction, the Legion of the Damned. That this once obscure, strange Ordo is now one of the most powerful factions at the Imperium's disposal, and is currently waging a secret, unseen war spread out across 40K's timeline. That their return at this precise moment could very well be heralding a future calamity, the likes of which mankind has never seen. But could all this really be true? If it is, then what is Ordo Chronos trying to stop? What actually is the Ordo Chronos in the first place? What is their history, and how did all of this happen? And most importantly of all, what role does the Legion of the Damned actually play in this? Because they seem to have a particular obsession with those dudes. Well, in this video, we're going to be diving into all that and a whole lot more. But full disclosure, due to the fact that this faction's lore is spread out over dozens of different obscure sources, all of which are infuriatingly cryptic, we're going to be getting into some pretty speculative territory. I've done the proper research, and I've gathered together every single source that mentions Ordo Chronos, big and small. Even the ones not listed on the wiki, thank you very much. So this video is going to serve as both a deep dive of their established canon, as well as a speculative piece about what they're trying to accomplish and their time-related ability. So take the theories presented in this video with a healthy grain of salt, especially at the end when we try to piece together this entire timey-wimey puzzle. So strap on your tinfoil hats, adjust your chronometers, and come with me as we dive headfirst into the grimdark and learn everything there is to know about Ordo Chronos. But first, a quick shout out to this video's sponsor. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Being a YouTuber is a fun job, but it's not a hard job. The only thing is, it does take a lot of time. Between editing, scripting, voiceovers, and an enormous amount of research, all-nighters are pretty commonplace. Sometimes I'll blink and the next thing I know, it's 4 in the morning and I'm too exhausted to drive home. So I'll just end up sleeping in the studio. Realistically, I probably do that a little too much. The major problem being, this is what I was sleeping on. It was uncomfortable, it creaked, and I never got a good night's sleep. But that all changed when Helix Sleep reached out to partner with me on a video and hooked me up with one of their mattresses to try out. This thing is absolutely amazing. I've had it for a little over a month now, and I've noticed a huge improvement in my sleeping quality. It's super comfortable, and I wake up feeling refreshed, energized, and ready to take on the day. Helix Sleep makes premium mattresses and bedding that are customized to fit your needs, and conveniently shipped right to your door with free shipping in the US. It comes rolled up in this cute little box and is super easy to set up by yourself. Helix Sleep understands that no two people have the same sleeping habits, so they sell 20 unique mattresses. They also have this sleep quiz that will ask you questions about your body type and sleep preferences to match you with the mattress that's perfect for you. Now, personally, I'm primarily a side sleeper, but every now and then I mix it up and I'll sleep on my back. So I got matched with the Sunset Luxe. It's incredibly soft and hugs my body in all the right ways. And listen, I get it, switching to a new mattress is a big decision. But Helix gives you a 100-night sleep trial test to make sure that you love it. They also offer a 10-year warranty with financing and flexible payment plan options. And get this, there's never been a better time to try a Helix mattress out for yourself, as they're sponsoring this video and offering my viewers an exclusive discount of 27% off your mattress purchase, plus 2 free pillows. Use promo code HelixPartner27 to take advantage of this special offer. But you gotta be fast, because this discount is going to end after Labor Day. Check out the Helix site for more details. Big thanks to Helix Sleep for sponsoring this video.
Even though the Ordo Chronos is hands down one of the most mysterious factions in the entirety of 40K, I'll freely admit that I always thought they were kind of underdeveloped on purpose. They seem to be defined primarily by their sudden disappearance, and going off of the fact that they're almost never mentioned and you really have to dig to find references to them, I assumed that their addition to the lore was just Games Workshop's way of adding a little bit of mystery to the setting. I'm here to tell you that I couldn't possibly have been more wrong. That although their story is purposefully obtuse, being broken up into dozens of small blurbs, paragraphs, and cryptic references spread out across dozens of sources, when you put all of the pieces together, you find yourself staring at one of the greatest conspiracies in the history of 40K, one that could be indicating some pretty crazy stuff happening in the near future. Don't worry, we're gonna piece the whole thing together in this video, and I brought the receipts. But to understand the mystery surrounding Ordo Chronos, we need to start at the very beginning of its history. We need to understand the nature of time anomalies and the threat they pose to mankind, and although it may be treading some old ground for 40K veterans, we need to start with a brief rundown of the Inquisition itself. If you're new to 40K, the Inquisition is oftentimes viewed as the Imperium's secret police, their ultimate mission to predict, identify, study, counter, and neutralize any and all possible threats to mankind, the Imperium, and the God Emperor. The problem is that the Imperium, to put it mildly, is a seemingly infinite and labyrinthian nightmare of intersecting bureaucratic departments. Something like a single SOS or approval request could take years, decades, or even centuries to make its way through the thousands of miles of red tape that is the Adeptus Administratum and get in front of the right person. And even then, it's highly likely that the request will end up getting lost or discarded somewhere along the way. Because the Inquisition's mission is so important, they're given the authority to bypass all of these channels, as if they were subject to them like everyone else, they wouldn't be able to do their job effectively. Thus, they're given supreme authority to operate as they see fit, their will subject only to the High Lords of Terra and the Emperor of Mankind. It should come as no surprise that in the grim darkness of the far future, the number of threats facing mankind on any given Tuesday are too numerous to count. Be they propagating out in the void, crawling their way into our reality, or, as is more commonly the case, coming from within the Imperium itself. So in order to combat them effectively, the Inquisition is divided into what are called Ordos. The three major Ordos being Hereticus, that deals with heretics, cults, and witches, Xenos, which combats alien threats, and Malleus, that studies the warp, demons, and the chaos gods. Now, although these are the three categories that get focused on the most in 40K, it's obvious that threats come in a lot more different categories than just those three. So beneath these three Ordos, you have dozens, if not potentially hundreds of minor Ordos as well, each grounded in a hyper-specific niche. A few of these include Ordo Maledictum, that focuses on studying the Great Rift and trying to find a way to close it. Ordo Sepulchrum, formed to combat a relatively new threat to the Imperium that appeared in the wake of the 13th Black Crusade, the Undead. And my personal favorite, Ordo Necro, whose purpose is not specified and there are no records pertaining to them, outside of the fact that there's another minor Ordo called Ordo Vigilis that exists solely to keep an eye on them, which, I'm not gonna lie, is kind of hilarious to me. Although it doesn't get focused on nearly as much as something like the Tyranids or the Followers of Chaos, Time, those who would accidentally or purposely violate it, and the strange entities birthed from its manipulation, are threats to the Imperium that the Inquisition takes very seriously. You see, Time and 40K are kind of weird. The name 40K in general is derived from the time period in which this franchise primarily takes place. For most of its runtime, we were set in the 41st millennium and just recently rolled over into the 42nd. Except that we haven't. Or more accurately, we as the audience, the Imperium, and all those living within it don't actually have any idea what year it actually is. Now, this isn't just because Games Workshop is really stingy when it comes to giving us actual hard timestamps on when certain events took place, but also because in-universe, keeping track of time as we understand it down to the precise second is really difficult to do when you're dealing with a civilization the size of the Imperium that stretches across the galaxy, in a civilization that has, let's just say, is spotty record-keeping at best. This is exacerbated even further because of humanity's reliance on the warp for faster-than-light travel. Millions of human vessels are moving in and out of the warp each and every day. And every single time one of them does this, the timeline is violated. Sometimes in small, inconsequential ways, and other times in pretty profound ones. This is because time flows differently in the warp, as sometimes it speeds up, sometimes it slows down. It can do all kinds of crazy stuff. Sometimes, from a crew's perspective, they will have been in the warp for only a couple of months, only to arrive at their destination and find out an entire decade has passed in real space. Sometimes even multiple centuries may have passed. In incredibly rare circumstances, the ship can even arrive at their destination before they technically departed. On one hand, this happening so frequently makes it difficult to keep an accurate count of the time and date, and not to mention the timeline of historical events. But on the other hand, all manner of temporal anomalies may arise from these and similar events. This is what the Ordo Chronos was originally believed to have been established to investigate, raving mad individuals from world to world that claim to have been from another time. Now, on one hand, you might not think this is that big of a deal. Sure, maybe it's something worth investigating, but a threat to the very foundations of mankind? What's a couple of raving time travelers that everybody thinks has just had a little too much amasec really going to do? Well, according to the Inquisition, quite a lot. Think about it. Most of the Imperium's history has been censored, purged, or aggressively downplayed or embellished. Most people within the Imperium think that Space Marines are literal angels, and there were only ever 9 Primarchs. All records of the Horus Heresy have been locked away, and though the people know that the warp is dangerous, simply knowing of the existence of demons, let alone the Chaos Gods, is something that's punishable by death. Could you imagine how much damage could be caused if people were showing up in the current year from thousands of years ago with information that everyone living in this time wasn't supposed to know about? What could happen if someone from the Great Crusade showed up in this time period with knowledge about the Emperor's 9 traitorous sons, or the fact that he claimed he wasn't a god? It could cause massive, widespread anarchy and political instability. And that's all bad enough from the perspective of a faction that takes extreme measures to maintain order, but individuals going backwards in time would be far worse, not just for the reasons mentioned beforehand, but because they could accidentally or purposefully interact with people, objects, and locations that directly interfere with historically important events. The Inquisition believes that such a temporally displaced person would have ample opportunity to manipulate the course of history. The tiniest variable being altered could fundamentally derail the fate of mankind and the Emperor's divine plans. The consequences of allowing these chronological abominations to continue to exist are virtually limitless. Now, at some point in the Ordo Chronos' history, as they delved further into time-related threats to the Imperium, they discovered that simple, misplaced Imperial citizens was only the tip of the iceberg when it came to temporal phenomena. So they expanded to investigating things like the Hadix anomaly and other warp storms that manipulated the flow of time in their vicinity. Further, they began to investigate species that had learned to control or even weaponize time. Species like the Hrud that produce entropic fields that speed up time for everything that gets too close to them. Or the chronomancers of the Necron dynasties. They also found out that there were tons of relics out there, be they sorcerous or scientific in nature, that could interrupt the proper flow of time. For example, there was a scene in the Ravener trilogy wherein our heroes were presented with a strange relic that took the form of a regular wooden door. When somebody walked through it, they would be transported to a random time and place. Now, the first time that our heroes used it, they ended up on a dead world that had been stripped of life down to the microbial level, and then were attacked by Tyranids. They escaped back through the door, but the creatures followed them through. Now, without getting into too many spoilers, the threat is eventually contained. But the crazy thing is that they had no idea what a Tyranid was. This took place centuries before their first documented sighting. Can you imagine how much damage would be done if such a relic fell into the wrong hands? If somebody used it to send the Tyranids back in time to a point when the Imperium was at their weakest, like say, right after the siege of Terra. Now, situations like this are exactly what the Ordo Chronos has been trained to prevent. Now, the Ordo spent many centuries investigating leads such as these before mysteriously disappearing without a trace. Every single Inquisitor, as well as every serf, menial, servitor, and agent, seemingly vanished into thin air or went into hiding, leaving behind no evidence to what had happened. Over the centuries, whispered rumors would pop up from time to time pertaining to them, as some said that a renegade faction within the Adeptus Mechanicus was responsible for their disappearance. Others say that they messed with something that they shouldn't have and ended up displaced somewhere within the timeline, and are currently trying to make their way back to the present. Some say they're still out there somewhere, pursuing an objective of significant importance known only to them, and that one day they will return to prevent some apocalyptic time-related calamity that mankind is unknowingly set on a collision course with. Now, that would be a great little place to end this video. A solid mystery that's been left open-ended, so we've got something to speculate on for years to come as a community. But the mystery of Ordo Chronos semi-recently took a huge confusing new turn, as with no fanfare or even acknowledgement in any way, shape, or form, they suddenly showed back up again in Imperial records at the end of the 41st millennium. The weird part, not a single person has seemingly even inquired about what happened to them. Not a single character has even acknowledged their disappearance and re-emergence as something that's kinda weird. To me, it feels very much like a, what are you talking about? They never disappeared, they've been here all along. It's definitely the same Ordo Chronos you remember, stop asking questions. I'm not buying it. Something weird is going on here, and to get to the bottom of it, we're going to take a look at 4 separate sources that have appeared in recent Warhammer stories that give us some critically important insight into what is going on with them. And as will be made apparent by the end of this video, the massive conspiracy they are involved in. So we'll start by getting the 2 boring ones out of the way first. We had a mention of Ordo Chronos in both the novels Avenging Sun and the first book in the Dark Imperium trilogy. In Avenging Sun, we learn that in order to keep track of the Indomitus Crusade's events, as well as make sure his fleet has precise knowledge of when they're going to arrive at key locations, the Chronologians on Guilliman's flagship are currently being assisted by a pair of operatives from Ordo Chronos. In the Dark Imperium book, there's a scene in Chapter 9 where Guilliman is flipping through a whole bunch of records pertaining to the Imperium's history over the last 10,000 years, to try to establish a proper timeline of events. This isn't the Imperium that he remembers from before his apparent death at the hands of his brother Fulgrim. It has slipped so far off course from what his father had envisioned that it's almost unrecognizable. It's only a single drop in the bucket that is the Imperium's problems, but an accurate recounting of history is something that is nonetheless an important step to getting everything back on track. But the more he flips through all of these records provided to him by Belisarius Cawl, the more distressed he's getting. It's an absolute clusterfuck of missing files, censored documents, outdated and factually incorrect accounts of historical events, and thousands of secret conflicts. One such secret conflict being something that is referred to as the Chronos Strife, a bitter ongoing internal war within Ordo Chronos over the Imperium's dating system. Now, unfortunately, this is all the information that we're given here, so we can take only a couple of things away from these 2 sources. Number 1, the Ordo is back in operation, but we're not given an explanation or even an acknowledgement of their previous disappearance. We don't know if this is the same Ordo Chronos that disappeared centuries ago, or if it's a new group of Inquisitors masquerading as them. Number 2, we know that the Ordo is currently embroiled in a civil war, sparked from disagreements over the Imperial calendar. It's not a lot to go off of by itself, but thankfully we have 2 more sources to examine, both of which stemming from the Warhammer horror line of novels and short stories, which most of the community has unfortunately been sleeping on. The first of these stories was called the Pharasine Paradox, which is fantastic and I covered in its entirety in my Grimdark Story Hour series, so check that out if you like spooky sci-fi horror stories. Without getting into spoilers for the story itself, as most of the new information we get pertaining to this particular subject is thankfully given to us right at the beginning anyways. In the story, we learn that an Inquisitor of Ordo Chronos named Astro Yarvis, who was an expert in temporal anomalies, became fascinated by unusual chronological manifestations near a nebula named Rho 386 Cummings. In order to more effectively study the nebula, he commissioned a watch station in its vicinity. He spent many years here along with those under his command, but one day, he received an urgent astropathic message informing him that he needed to attend a gathering of other Inquisitors from his Ordo immediately. He left his interrogator behind and placed him in charge of the watch station. He told him, quote, "Keep a weather eye on the nebula until I return." Then he set off for an unknown location towards the eastern edge of the Ultima Segmentum. He would never be seen again. The truth was that this meeting was going to be when the entire Ordo disappeared. Now, the big takeaway from me here is that this Inquisitor didn't give any indication to his interrogator that he knew what he was walking into. He didn't say, "I'm going to be gone for a really long time," or "I'm never going to return again." And the story implies that he had a really close relationship with his prodigy here. He wouldn't simply abandon him. Now, to me, this could indicate a couple of different things. The most obvious scenario is simply that Astro didn't tell him not to wait for him because he thought he was going to come right back. But then a tragic accident occurred at the undisclosed meeting location that wiped out the entire Ordo in a single blow. But if I'm being honest with you, I'm not buying the easy solution here. A meeting like this is not a regular occurrence for the Inquisition. An entire Ordo gathering together in one place is only done in the most dire of circumstances for exactly this reason, to prevent something like all of them getting killed at the same time. What I think is more likely, however, is something was revealed at that meeting, something uncovered by the other Inquisitors within the Ordo that Astro wasn't aware of, something that once revealed fundamentally changed the trajectory of Ordo Chronos forever. Is something so profound, so game-changing, that dozens of Inquisitors would do the unthinkable and immediately abandon their life's work to pursue. But what could they have discussed that day? What was the Ordo experimenting with, and what terrible truths did they uncover? For insight into that, we turn to the final recent source, another entry in the Warhammer horror catalog, Perdition's Flame. If you're interested in it, I covered this one in the Grimdark Story Hour as well as the Pharasine Paradox, and I'll have both of those linked down below in the description as well as at the end screen at the end of the video. I say this now because there's no way to discuss Ordo Chronos' connection to this story without spoiling the twist ending. So go watch my video on it and then come back if you don't want it spoiled. But otherwise, we're gonna dive right into it because I've been wanting to talk about the implications of this one for a while. Okay, so in the story, we have an Inquisitor from Ordo Chronos named Inquisitor Erin, who has recently commandeered an Imperial prison ship. She's told the ship's captain that she has a relic in her possession of great importance to her Ordo, and she needs to be transported safely. But she doesn't tell anyone any more information than that. However, shortly after boarding the vessel, all manner of strange things started to happen. The crew began complaining about hearing voices, seeing shadowy figures move out of the corner of their eyes. The ship's system started to malfunction, and over time, it just got worse and worse until the vessel's warp drive went offline and half of its augury systems got knocked out. Even worse, they were unknowingly being pursued by something demonic. Something that ended up spawning an entire legion of poxwalkers that ended up manifesting across the ship. The story follows two separate main characters forced into an unlikely alliance. A guardswoman named Captain Brandon and one of the prisoners that the ship was transporting named Guardsman Vox, who was being transported to a penal colony for crimes of cowardice. They end up forced into a survival situation where pretty much all of the armed forces on the ship end up getting killed, and they have to figure out what is going on in order to make it out alive. Their journey through the ship's guts ends up eventually taking them to the Inquisitor's chamber, as they realize that all of these strange things started happening after she joined them. Whatever relic she had in her possession was causing all of the phenomena and drawing in these demons like moths to a flame. When they finally make it to the Inquisitor's chambers, they're greeted with a pretty strange sight. It's like a huge cathedral containing dozens of pews that have hundreds of skeletons seated upon them, each one hooked up to a strange psychic device. In the room's center is a huge bizarre machine built around an ancient sarcophagus and covered in clocks, chronometers, and many other time-related instruments that are all frozen still. They find the Inquisitor on her knees and plugged into the machine with a whole bunch of restraints holding her in place. She's whispering a strange mantra. By force of mind shall you be bound. By force of mind shall space resist form. By force of mind shall time resist computation. By force of mind shall we endure. So, as it turns out, all of the skeletons in the room are psychers that the Inquisitor had requisitioned from the black ships bound for Terra to be sacrificed to the Golden Throne. Instead, she hooked them up to the machine and slowly siphoned away their power to keep this device functioning. Now, with all of the disasters that have ensued across the ship, in a last-ditch effort to keep this thing going, she has hooked herself up to it, just to keep it powered a little bit longer. They unhook her from the machine, and as soon as she's out, all of the clocks on the device start ticking again. Miraculously, their Vox equipment, which up until this point had not been working, suddenly spring back to life. They go to help the limp Inquisitor back to her feet, but she snaps out of her trance, freaking out, jumping past them and desperately trying to connect back to the machine. But in order to get her out in the first place, they had to cut through many of its wires and cables. Realizing that she's completely severed from it, she goes into full panic mode, freaking out, wailing and sobbing as if she had just lost a child. She calls them savages, asks them if they have any idea what they've done, how many years it had taken her to get this far, what they had cost the Ordo Chronos. The two main characters, who at this point blame the Inquisitor for everything that has happened to them, tell her point blank that the situation had reached critical mass and they were forced to take drastic measures. She was no longer in charge, the ship was overrun, and they were done listening to her. She looks at them in disbelief and tells them that they had one job: to keep the ship safe. If they had just done their job, she could have contained this thing until they reached port. Right after this, she collapses to the floor and starts to spasm. All of the damage the machine had done to her body by draining away portions of her soul has finally caught up to her. Meanwhile, all of the Poxwalkers have broken into the room, and they've got seconds left to flee before they get overrun. But Vox refuses. He demands to know what this machine is, why it was so important that the Inquisitor would risk the lives of everyone aboard to protect it. With her dying breath, she says that it isn't a machine, it's a cage. In that moment, the sarcophagus at its center rips open and the lid goes flying across the room, and out steps a space marine in armor as black as the void, wreathed in flames with a skull for a face. She had captured a member of the Legion of the Damned, who then proceeded to go absolutely berserk, murdering all of the oncoming Poxwalkers. I won't spoil the ending, as this is where the Ordo's involvement ends, and it's still definitely worth checking out for yourself. But what the actual f***? Okay, so in order to make sense of all this and figure out what the Ordo Chronos was attempting to do here, we have to briefly talk about the Legion of the Damned. Now, I'll keep it brief, as I've been meaning to do a full deep dive on them in the future. Now, although the Legion of the Damned looks like a chapter of Space Marines, we don't actually know what they are. Some people think they're demons of the Emperor. Some people think they're the psychic ghost of the loyalists slain at the drop site massacre, and others believe that they are the lost Ultramarine successor chapter, the Firehawks, who disappeared into the warp and were afflicted with some type of crazy warp-born mutation that turned them into immortal wraiths, blessed with all manner of supernatural powers. I'll go into all these stories in more detail in their dedicated video, but for now we're going to take the Lost Firehawks theory as canon, as it's the one that has the most concrete evidence behind it. It's also the one that's mentioned in pretty much every single source that talks about the Legion of the Damned outside of the novels, dating all the way back to their Codex Astartes entry in White Dwarf issue 99, published in 1988. Now, in fairness, this could definitely be a 40-year-long misdirection from Games Workshop. I certainly wouldn't put that past them. But for now, this is a theory that the lore presents to us as their canonical origin, so it's the one that we're going to go with. Okay, so why is this of any importance to the Ordo Chronos specifically? Well, first and foremost, the Legion is without a doubt a form of temporal anomaly, meaning that they fall under the jurisdiction of the Ordo Chronos. But they're not just any old regular temporal anomaly. They're ones that have seemingly mastered the chaotic and random nature of the flow of time within the warp. We have an exact date when the Firehawks chapter disappeared and likely became the Legion of the Damned. It was in the year 963 of the 41st millennium. But this wasn't the Legion's first sighting. They would be present during the Pyrocataclysm of Villadad Prime in the 6th year of the 40th millennium, almost 2,000 years before the Firehawks' disappearance. And this wasn't the only instance of this happening, as they also appeared at the Battle of Godba 643 years before that day. They assaulted an Eldar craft world in M41-852, and were present at the Battle of Andraxa in M41-922, showing up again and again to fight in the defense of mankind somehow before they were even created. Now, certainly one could dismiss this as simply evidence that proves that the Firehawks are not in fact the Legion of the Damned, or that those earlier sightings were simply a case of misidentification. But when we look at the 6th edition Legion of the Damned Codex, we get a passage that explains when the Ordo Chronos first started investigating their rumored sightings, they noticed a peculiar pattern. You see, the Legion only ever appeared at the most critical of times, never too late and never too early, and always precisely in the most advantageous position to bring death to the enemy, almost as if they had already seen the battle play out, like it was ancient history to them that had been studied from every conceivable angle. This compiled with the fact that they were clearly manifesting out of the warp and were not adherent to its random nature was of great interest to Ordo Chronos. A large portion of their inquisitors are said to have dedicated their entire lives to pursuing them in order to learn their secrets. But every single time one of them would get close, an unprecedented disaster would occur. These ranged from things like landslides, explosions, telekinetic bursts of energy, or even sudden mass onset aneurysms that caused everyone that was pursuing them to suddenly keel over dead. Whatever the Legion of the Damned actually is, and who or what is controlling them, has made it very clear that it has no intention of sharing its secrets, and has seemingly godlike abilities to ensure that no one will ever get close enough for an interview unless it deems it important. Now, unfortunately, the Inquisitor's intentions in Perdition's flame are never really made apparent to us, past the fact that she seems to have accomplished the impossible by capturing one of them. Simply trying to keep it contained was a massive undertaking that ended up dooming an entire ship and hundreds, if not thousands, of people. But what if she wasn't the only person who managed to capture one of them? It certainly wouldn't make any sense that if this cage was a one-of-a-kind relic, that the Ordo would leave such a critically important mission in the hands of a single Inquisitor. What if Ordo Chronos made dozens of these things, and where Inquisitor Erin may have failed, one or more of her colleagues managed to succeed? Such an event would certainly be a legendary moment for Ordo Chronos, one that very well may have called for an immediate gathering of every single one of their Inquisitors at an undisclosed location, one like the one Astro Yarvitz went to right before the Ordo disappeared. What if the Ordo's disappearance wasn't a freak accident? What if they didn't all get wiped out or sucked into a time vortex never to be seen again? What if they were able to replicate the Legion of the Damned's time-traveling abilities? And what if they used their newfound powers to elevate themselves to a higher calling, one wherein they would no longer function as simply a minor Ordo, their investigations limited by something as trivial as the current year? What if they all became seemingly omnipotent agents of the Emperor, able to freely travel through space and time at will? Now, surely that's ludicrous. There would be clear evidence of this happening throughout 40K's lore. Surely we couldn't open something like, say, I don't know, the Deathwatch RPG supplement The Outer Reach and see direct evidence of a mysterious unknown Inquisitor seeding information to people about future catastrophes, including one linked to a long-feared celestial phenomena known as the Dark Pattern. Well, here's the thing. We absolutely can do that because that 100% happened. For those of you who have been following my Grimdark Mystery series, you know exactly where this is going. Thousands of years ago in the Jericho Reach sector, the Imperium discovered this thing they refer to as the Dark Pattern, a series of dead worlds that don't make any sense. They look like they're out of space and time, like they were all brought here by some unknowable cosmic force for an unknown reason. These worlds were studied for many years, but nothing conclusive ever came up. But there was this one Inquisitor named Sinclair who was convinced that they represented a danger to mankind. He studied them on his own for 10 years without much to show for it, until on one of them he found a set of strange alien ruins and went inside. Now, we don't know what happened in those ruins, as this is where his transcript of the events end, but we do know that his entire team was killed, and the next time he was seen, he was floating alone in space several light years away in a state of confusion, malnutrition, and dehydration. Now, after he recovered, he went to an inquisitorial conclave with his findings, telling them that the Dark Pattern needed to be taken seriously. But the other Inquisitors looked at his evidence and didn't think this was very conclusive, so they were just about to deny his request when a strange woman showed up. One that none of them had ever seen before, who was bearing an inquisitorial rosette and the symbol of an hourglass. She told them that if Sinclair's warning wasn't heeded, the future consequences would be dire, that the ancients would rise again unchecked. Seeing as nobody knew who this woman was, whether she had a rosette or not, the conclave moved to have her arrested. But before the Deathwatch Marines that were in attendance could move to do so, she disappeared in a flash of light and left behind only a strange book with the dual symbols of both the Inquisition and the hourglass etched into their surface. No matter what they tried, this book couldn't be opened, so it was taken to the Chamber of Vigilance for further study and analysis. To this day, it still hasn't opened up, but there are whispers that the techno-arcane mechanisms that keep it sealed will open of their own accord on a particular day in the future when the information contained within is needed the most. Now, that's a little bit of a side tangent. Let's get back to the mysterious woman in Sinclair. Now, you see, the very next night in his chambers, she appeared before him, which freaked him out because all of the doors were locked and there was no possible way she could have gotten in. I'm going to go ahead and read to you the conversation that took place between the two of them so no key details get lost in the translation. Her garb marked her as a member of the Inquisition, Baroque armor bearing the stylized eye of that order, covered by a loose-fitting embroidered robe. Purity seals hung from a number of areas. Numerous trinkets and reliquaries adorned her person, including an intricate hourglass.
A simple matter, really, but that is of little concern. I come to you now as one who has seen the end result of your fears, and I urge you to continue to pursue your goals. The dead Cabal will be needed in the coming years with the utmost urgency.
What does that mean? End result of my fears. You speak as though you know the...
His voice trailed off.
Who are you? What Ordo do you represent?
A stark realization began to set in, and Sinclair took a step closer to the woman.
Can it be? Are you really of the Ordo?
We have no time for speculation, my good Inquisitor Sinclair. What you must know is this. There are forces greater than anything you can imagine at work throughout the Jericho Reach. It will fall upon the shoulders of the Death Watch to one day ensure that certain events do not come to pass if mankind is to survive. Choose wisely of those you would bring into this endeavor, and above all things, beware the rising of the hollow sun.
Sinclair threw his hands up and turned from the woman, exasperation written across his features.
You speak in riddles. What is a hollow sun?
As he turned back, the woman was gone, and the lumen globes in the room seemed to return to normal, dispelling the shadows that hung in its corners. Okay, so to briefly summarize what happened next, after this, the Inquisition from this point forward viewed Sinclair with suspicion, many going as far as branding him as a radical. He didn't care though. He now knew that he served a higher purpose and continued his investigations on his own. He would end up becoming something of a mythical figure, popping up all over the place to assist the Death Watch kill teams whenever one of their missions would take them to one of the worlds within the Dark Pattern, after which he would then disappear, not to be seen again for decades or even centuries. The last recorded sighting of Sinclair was in the early part of the 41st millennium, which is frankly impossible, because he would surely have been dead at this point for thousands of years. Now, even if the Inquisition didn't trust him and never officially sanctioned an investigation into the Dark Pattern, the Death Watch respected the guy, and many of them took his warning very seriously. So the Death Watch would carry on in his mission, establishing dozens of new watch stations throughout Jericho's Reach to monitor the Dark Pattern. However, thousands of years would pass, and over time, the watch stations would end up becoming abandoned due to many other pressing factors that were drawing the Death Watch's attention. At this point, they would become known as the Dead Stations. Now, in more recent times, there's suddenly been renewed interest in studying the Dark Pattern, and the Death Watch has formed what they refer to as the Dead Cabal, consisting of 5 Death Watch Space Marines: Night Warden Alric, Prognosticator Renan Terrell, Master of the Forge Zeriel, and Watch Captain Matthias. Then, sometime after their formation, they would be joined by their 5th and final member, a shadowy inquisitor named Valaine Ramius. Now, tell me if this all sounds familiar. This inquisitor is also super mysterious. Nobody knows who she is, where she came from, what her history is, and what Ordo she belongs to. There are some super old records of an inquisitor matching her description that was also super mysterious and apparently showed up out of nowhere before disappearing again. But they're inconclusive, and she's clearly just a mortal woman. Those records are from a single conclave from several millennia ago. It certainly wouldn't be the same person. To even suggest such a thing would be a foolish waste of time. Like a few of the individuals we've previously spoken about, Valaine is never around, and nobody knows where she is or what she's doing until she suddenly appears without warning where she's needed the most, and then vanishes just as abruptly after the situation has passed. Or at other times, she shows up to inform the Death Watch of a mission of critical importance, telling them just what they need to know before disappearing again. Those who have actually spoken with her say that she has this really off-putting habit of finishing other people's sentences and responding to their actions before they happen, as if she knows what they're about to say or do. There's a ton of rumors that have circulated about her, ranging from her being a latent psyker to an operative from the Legio Assassinorum. However, whispered in the upper echelons of the Death Watch scholars is a theorized connection to Ordo Chronos. If any know the truth for sure, it's one of the 4 other members of the Dead Cabal, and so far, they haven't provided any answers. Okay, so now that we've gone over all of this information, I'm gonna go into full tinfoil hat mode and try to tie all of these things together. So, the Ordo Chronos was founded to investigate people misplaced in time via warp travel. But as time went on, however, their research efforts continued to expand. They learned that time-displaced voidfarers were but the tip of the iceberg when it came to temporal anomalies, that the galaxy was absolutely flooded with time-related threats. They began to investigate all of these different categories, and eventually their investigative efforts led them to the Legion of the Damned, who were potentially the greatest time anomaly of all, in that they had complete mastery of time travel and, by all accounts, were aligned with the Emperor just like they were. It was then that they shifted their efforts to attempting to gain an audience with them in order to learn their secrets. But every single attempt was met with failure. Undeterred, they doubled down on their efforts, and eventually, their centuries of research into all things related to time, including the sciences and forbidden sorceries centered around its control, would bear fruit. They would learn how to construct a device that would bypass the Legion's defenses, allowing an Inquisitor to bind and capture one of its members. How many of these cages were created and how many members of the Legion were successfully apprehended is unknown. But eventually, their mission was deemed a success. The secrets learned from the Legion were so profound that an immediate gathering of every Ordo Chronos Inquisitor was called. It's unlikely that all of these Inquisitors knew what was going on, but they at least understood that what was going to be presented was confidential and of critical importance. So much so that they were instructed to leave behind no records of the meeting's location or the Ordo's intentions. It is likely that what was presented at this meeting was directly tied to the Legion of the Damned's abilities, that they had learned the Legion's secrets and could now operate in exactly the same way that they did. This was a profound breakthrough that would fundamentally change the course of the Ordo's history and its purpose going forward. They all left together, disappearing without a trace, stepping outside of the timeline. They were no longer simply individuals investigating time anomalies, they had become one themselves. Their members from this point forward would be able to move backwards and forwards through time and space exactly the same way that the Legion of the Damned did, making sure certain events were prevented and key individuals were present at critically important points in time. They would then seemingly return to our timeline near the end of the 41st millennium after the destruction of Cadia, the formation of the Great Rift, the resurrection of Rabute Gilliman, and the launch of the Indomitus Crusade. Arguably one of the most important points in the Imperium's history. Given as how not a single person in any of the stories has acknowledged the ludicrousness of an entire Ordo disappearing without a trace and then suddenly showing back up again to no fanfare, it is my belief that the Ordo erased its own disappearance from the timeline. From the perspective of everyone alive today that knows of them, they never disappeared. They are simply a minor Ordo of the Inquisition that is particularly pedantic about dates and calendars. So much so that they would devolve into infighting at the mere suggestion that the calendar could be wrong. It is my belief that one of two things could possibly be occurring here. Either A, this is nothing but a cover-up, a purposeful misdirection designed to give them an air of incompetence and unimportance, or B, there are now two Ordo Chronoses. The current Ordo Chronos that the Imperium knows about and is present on Gilliman's flagship is a version of the Ordo that was never successful in unlocking the secrets of time travel and thus never disappeared. Because they never had any major breakthroughs like this, over the years their role and importance has slowly diminished, to the point where they're glorified calendar keepers. While the original Ordo Chronos, the one that was successful and did disappear, remains removed from the timeline and is free to move throughout it at will, ensuring that the Emperor's divine plans fully come to pass. Okay, so at the end of all this, full disclosure, although I believe this to be the truth of Ordo Chronos, we are missing huge swaths of information. And this theory was pieced together by examining at bare minimum a dozen different sources stretching back to 40K's early history, some of which only give us a very small cryptic piece of an incomplete puzzle. So though I'm confident in my research, take all this with a massive grain of salt, as it's a mystery that's still very much in development. and I've had to employ some educated guesswork to fill in the gaps in my theory. As I've mentioned in the past, I'm probably at around 150 novels read at this point, plus an enormous amount of supplementary material from the last 30 years of 40K, but I haven't read everything that's ever been released in this franchise. So if you've read something that mentions Ordo Chronos in any capacity from a source that I didn't mention in this video, definitely let me know about it in the comments. And speaking of which, what do you think of all this? Do you think I hit the nail on the head with Ordo Chronos and they're potentially one of the most important, if not powerful organizations, not just within the Inquisition, but the Imperium as a whole? Or do you think I've gone completely off the deep end? That's totally fair as well. If not for the reasons I theorized, why do you think it is that nobody has acknowledged the Ordo's disappearance and sudden re-emergence? Do you think that the Chronos strife that Gilliman was reading about is an actual civil war being fought across space and time by the Ordo? Or do you think it really is just a disagreement about imperial dating systems? What about the Legion of the Damned? What further role do you think they play in all this? Are they allies of the Ordo now, or does the Ordo look at them as simply a power source? Considering the fact that the Legion is privy to future information and still wanted nothing to do with the Ordo, and also that they literally imprisoned them, I'm leaning towards them not exactly being on friendly terms. Also, I didn't have time to go into it in this video, but Belisarius Cawl just recently revealed that he knows of a planet that is trapped in the event horizon of a black hole, meaning that it is quite literally a planet from the war in heaven that has been frozen in time for 60 million years. And as is tradition for someone like Belisarius Cawl, he's not concerned with the risks. He wants to go there. That was in the novel Janefather that didn't come out that long ago, and so this is probably certainly the subject of a future Black Library novel currently being written. If my theory is correct, then there's no way that Ordo Chronos isn't going to want to be involved in that. Maybe the lost technology found on this world will be of great benefit to mankind, and they're going to show up to make sure that Cawl gets it. Or on the other hand, they may know that the horrors he's going to uncover will pose a significant threat to the Imperium, and they're going to want to stop him. I could go on and on theorizing about this stuff because I find it super interesting, but I think I've rambled long enough. Let me know all of your thoughts, comments, questions, and concerns down in the comment section below. As you know, I read all of them, and I genuinely love hanging out and talking with y'all in there. Also, if you've been enjoying my videos and you're not subscribed yet, I think now is probably the best possible time to fix that. Go ahead and click subscribe, like the video, and leave me a comment. It super helps me out, and I would definitely appreciate it. Anyways, big thanks to everyone who supports all the work that I do, and I will catch you all in the next one.